Hi everyone, thank you so much for joining us for our webinar today, What Open Source is and How Your Nonprofit Can Benefit. Before we get started, I just wanted to go over a few housekeeping items, so all callers will be muted. If you have questions, you should see a chat box to the left-hand side of your screen. Feel free to ask questions as we go along, and we will get to them during the Q&A. If you lose your internet connection, feel free to refresh your browser and reconnect using the link that was emailed to you. If you have to leave early or if you want to watch the webinar again, we'll be hosting the webinar on our website, techsoup.org/community/events-webinars. And we'll also be sending out an email once the webinar is over with a link to the presentation, the recording, and any relevant links that we talked about during the webinar. If you're on social media, feel free to tweet at us at TechSoup using hashtag TSWebinars. But like I said earlier, we're going to be mostly focused on the Q&A box that you see here on the left-hand side. So just a little bit about TechSoup before we get started. We are in 236 countries and territories, and we serve over 1 million nonprofits around the world. We partner with several technology companies like Adobe, Amazon Web Services, Intuit, Microsoft, Symantec, and several others that you see here to make our mission possible, providing donated or discounted technologies to nonprofits. If you're interested in finding out if your nonprofit is eligible, feel free to visit the URL that you see here and see what product donations are available. We have a lot of great donated and discounted products. So I just want to make sure that that you guys can hear me okay. So if you guys don't mind just using the chat box to just chat in where you're calling in from, and I'm going to read out a few of those before I introduce John. All right, we have Madison, Wisconsin, Philadelphia, Silver Spring, Clayton. Okay, so you guys can hear me okay. Perfect. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and introduce everyone on the call today. So my name is Seema Tucker. I am the Senior Manager of Content here at TechSoup. My colleague Zareen Kazi, she's the Marketing Associate, and she'll be helping out on the back end with chat. And then we have our main speaker today, so John Jones. John is the Vice President of Interactive Strategies at the CASE Foundation. John leads technical strategy, interactive campaign development, and the digital execution for the Foundation's programs and movements. He has a passion for technology and finding ways for it to both serve and lead the Foundation's efforts. A developer by education, you can often find John dissecting new technologies and research to discover what impact it can have. So I'm going to go ahead and pass it off to John.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Seema. So excited to talk to everyone today about what open source is and how your nonprofit can benefit. Like Seema said, my name is John Jones, I'm Vice President of Interactive Strategies, and I'm definitely a tech geek by background. And right now I'm working to spread access to technology via open source. I'm going to talk more deeply what that is and how you can benefit from it today. So before we dive into that, I just want to give you a quick background on the CASE Foundation. So the CASE Foundation was established in 1997 by Gene and Steve Case. If you remember the company America Online, AOL, Steve and Gene, Steve was co-founder of AOL, Gene was an executive there. And the CASE Foundation invests in people and ideas that can change the world. Sort of a big high-level mission, and what that kind of levels up to is we have a focus on sort of inspiring and raising all people to be fearless and pursue their own sort of change-making missions. We do that by catalyzing movements around areas we think that are really transformative. Two areas where we do a lot of that work in is impact investing and inclusive entrepreneurship. Overall, we have always had a passion around democratizing technology, bridging the digital divide, and open source is one way we bring that to bear in both those movements we serve and with sort of everyone we touch in the course of doing the Foundation's work. Also today, we are running a survey just about open source engagement in the nonprofit sector. So at the end of this webinar, I'm going to ask that everyone takes the survey. It only takes about 5 minutes, but just trying to gauge across sector. How are people using this idea of open source software? How are they participating? How are they contributing? And what value are they getting from it? So we're using that to learn and really guide our efforts moving forward when we talk about open source in the nonprofit sector. But so before I dive into the background of open source a little bit, just want to get a sense from everyone by this poll here What is your familiarity with the term open source? Sort of a techie term, but it enters the mainstream in some interesting ways. But we'd love to hear from this audience today where everyone sits with this. And it's okay if you have no background in it. That's why you're here to learn. So please be honest. Give everyone a few seconds to answer. Awesome, cool. So pretty good spread in terms of knowledge around open source. Looking like we have about 42% on both the beginner and intermediate category, a few people in the none category. So this is perfect. I think you will get a lot of information out of this webinar today based on that answer. All right, so let's go back in time a little bit and talk about just the history of open source and really why it's become so crucial to the tech sector overall and sort of where it sits today in the larger universe. So way back in the beginning of computing as really a serious business tool in the 1960s up through the 1980s, early software was research projects. It was shared amongst academia. It was really something that there was no proprietary sort of thought around. It was everyone was trying to figure out how all these computers worked and freely shared code and projects and iterated off each other. Through the 1970s, as computers became cheaper and a little more viable, commercial software started taking over and becoming more of the status quo. But even early home computer software, if anybody remembers back in school when you had like an Apple II computer, code was kind of freely shared around in books and still pretty shared freely among academics and enthusiasts all the way up through the 1980s. Particularly as the internet took hold, then the sharing of code, sharing of projects, sharing of software became more and more viable. But things really changed in the 1990s with the birth of something called the World Wide Web. That was an open source project. It was an open specification. The idea was when Tim Berners-Lee, the inventor of the web, created it, he wanted it to be shared. He made it for everyone. And so he created this web ecosystem, which spawned groups like Mozilla, which kind of grew out of Netscape Navigator. And it was one of the first high-profile open source projects. They said, okay, we are going to make an open source web browser as sort of a standard for the whole industry that everyone can iterate off of and learn from. And then through the 2000s, open source grew even more, and it became really pivotal to business. They saw it as an innovation center, a place for recruitment, a place where the best and brightest minds were going to work. They also saw it as a way to work transparently and share information among companies, share how they were doing things, how they were working together in really, really cool ways that allowed everyone to succeed. And it works now in conjunction with open and closed source software. So for instance, most people have an iPhone or an Android phone. A lot of those devices use open source code, but some of it's closed source. It all sort of intermixes and used in really, really interesting ways. To give you an idea of how it's used today in some more specific formats, in the private sector, in companies, Google, Microsoft, Amazon, Apple, all the big players in the tech industry all collaborate on open source projects. They share code amongst each other. And we even see really interesting uses in places like journalism. For instance, the New York Times produces a lot of open source software to directly benefit the growth of digital journalism. So as they create new exciting ways to grow their platform, they share a lot of that. So other journalism ecosystems can use that. Motivation for that is creating these ecosystems of sharing, of growing. Companies also will sometimes open source their software and have a business model based off of support and hosting. So they say, hey, the software is free for you to use. If you need help with it, if you need support with it, we're here on a contractual basis. There's also the idea that open source software is more secure through its transparency, that by letting everyone see how the sausage is made, you're going to find problems much sooner and be able to address security issues much sooner. And like I said, there is the ongoing recognition of the community's innovative power, that more people, more minds contributing to an idea, you can rise the best innovations to the top. And that's something we're really, really passionate about when we talk about open source. And also open source is used by these companies as an attractor for recruitment and retention of top talent, which plays out pretty often. And when we talk about these open source projects, the ones they're creating aren't just used by fellow companies. Some of the best open source projects out there created by these companies are also used by nonprofits. There's really no barrier sometimes to these projects. For instance, WordPress and Drupal, two of the biggest open source projects out there, you might have a website running on them. Those are sponsored by large companies who produce them and sell services off of them, but they keep the product open source so that anyone can benefit and use this great technology. In government, we're starting to see a really interesting use of open source software, and this really started to happen a couple of years ago in the previous administration, where there were two organizations created called the U.S. Digital Service and 18F. They were created here in DC to spawn more use of open source projects, with the idea that if one agency procures a very specific piece of software for something like HR or something mundane, they should be able to share that with the agency next to them who might have a similar mission and work in a similar way. Prior to that, there was a lot of rebuilding the wheel constantly, so really interesting work sharing code between different forms of government. And we're starting to see now state and local governments start to embrace open source in the same way, where we're seeing cities share open source, where they're building different solutions to solve civic problems, and neighboring cities are sharing this code with one another as a way to further accelerate all of their work addressing their citizens' concerns and reduce their costs by sharing these solutions with each other. They're not paying the same procurement fees over and over again for the same pieces of software. And on the individual level, developers in their spare time create passion projects, things that they're really interested in, and they push them out in open source. And when I say push them out in open source, there are different online communities where you can release these pieces of code. One of the biggest ones is called GitHub, and it's sort of a social network for developers where you can publish your code. Other people can favorite it, they can star it, they can suggest ideas, and this is a big place where developers go to grow their own sort of portfolio, but also contribute their own time to projects they care about and causes they care about. And oftentimes we will see some of these projects that are just little sort of side passion projects develop into much bigger deals. So the New York Times has a blog called Upshot. They do really cool data visualizations. All that is powered by something called D3, which was a side project by somebody who was in grad school, wanted to make a new sort of way to do data visualizations on the web. New York Times got wind of it and said, hey, why don't you come on board? New York Times will pay you to maintain this open source project for everybody. So he continues to build this so they can have these great visualizations, but the software is free. Anybody can have this amazingly powerful tool to build these amazing data visualizations free of charge, thanks to the New York Times support of this developer. As I said, Drupal and WordPress, they started as side projects, but they've grown up into these large companies, Acquia and Automatic. Software is still free as open source, and these companies just charge hosting and licensing fees, or hosting and support fees, but you don't necessarily have to pay them. You can just use the software for free. And lastly, there are projects like Open Collective and Patreon out there that help raise funds for small projects. So we're starting to see even some side developers who solely subsist on their open source work thanks to support via these platforms where you can fund a developer to work on an open source project exclusively if it has value or the community uses it very often. All right, so we are going to skip ahead to this next slide here. So open source as a force multiplier for change-making efforts. To talk about open source, talked about sort of the background of it and how it's used really across different ecosystems right now. But when we're talking about nonprofits, when we're talking about trying to change the world in a lot of situations, how does open source play into that thinking? So first of all, open source, when you really think down to it on the level of giving something away, it's a form of philanthropy. And the really cool thing about that is that one gift of code can have unlimited beneficiaries. So a typical philanthropic gift, a financial donation, it's an exhaustible gift. So once those grant dollars are spent, once that prize money is spent, it's gone. And you need to fundraise again, you need to grow again. Whereas a gift of open source software to the community, to the public, the value never goes away. Organization after organization, person after person can tap into the value of this project and continue to reap the benefits of that gift. Really, really amazing thing when you think about it that way, particularly knowing the cost of technology. So both organizations and individuals can embrace this, and it's an alternative to financial support that maybe supporting an open source project, giving an open source project away as, if I'm a developer looking to give back a certain amount of time, or I'm an organization that has a project that I want to give away, that has sort of a financial value to it, so it's equivalent in that way. And we're starting to see more grants coming out of foundations stipulating the funding of open source, or if new technology is being created as a result of a grant, it should be open source. Something we're really excited about when we think about open source in the context of philanthropy. Also democratizes tech. Like I said, the foundation, something we've always been really passionate about, is bridging that digital divide. And this is a really great way in which that happens. So because open source software is free to access, absolutely democratizing technology. It's creating that free access. In addition, it is a community process whereby many people can contribute their ideas and their thoughts, even feedback to projects. The continued democratization of tech creates this amazing on-ramp that also, for those who may not have all the technical know-how necessary to do something, but they see value in an open source project and they can combine different projects together to create whole new sort of solutions and awesome things that are at competitive parity with closed source software. So more and more we're seeing open source software function just as well as many closed source or proprietary solutions that exist that also have that financial barrier, whereas open source does not. And it's an accelerant of innovation. Because it's collaborative, because you have so many people contributing ideas openly and sharing, it's a force multiplier, and it raises those best innovations to the top, and we continually see that in the open source ecosystem. Something we see to be very helpful to nonprofits, whereby you're encouraging the largest swath of technologists and thinkers possible to kickstart collaboration, increase efficiency, and really share success and even iterate off of failures from one another. And we're starting to see them deployed in really cool ways. I'm going to talk about that in a little bit here. So we can also take a leadership role in the open source sector. It's a way for us to engage with others tackling problems in the same space. And open source can create some really serendipitous relationships between producers of technology and those who need it. And like the broader tech industry overall, there's still much to do in terms of inclusivity and civility in open source. And that's something the nonprofit sector can help drive. We can help the open source ecosystem address some of those problems and improve. So just to get a sense of who may be using open source software already, quick poll here. Are you using any of these tools already, like WordPress, Drupal, Linux, or none? Would love to know kind of what everyone's engagement with that is. Cool, awesome. Yeah, I figured a lot of WordPress, about 26%, which definitely makes sense. It's one of the most deployed open source projects in general. So definitely excited to see that being used here. So let's talk about some examples of nonprofits who are currently embracing open source in really cool ways. So first up, we have the great Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation, certainly leaders in so many different ways. They created last year a platform called Mojaloop, which is an open source project that creates sort of a financial platform and creates an opportunity for interoperability between banks. Where they're deploying this right now is in developing worlds where there is no current ecosystem for banking. They found that to be one of the biggest barriers, where there was no infrastructure, and therefore that was causing costs of banking to be incredibly high. So they said, all right, well, if we create an open source platform, a foundation on which others can build banking software, that's going to drastically reduce the cost of what these new financial services firms must charge in order to support their clients. So they're in the process of deploying it right now, and it's totally open source. So they're leading the charge in deploying it, but anybody can iterate off of it, suggest ideas, or even deploy it themselves, all in the idea that it's to support financial inclusion. And so their view is if there's somebody who has a way to do this better or to iterate off of it, please come talk to us. It's open. It's an open form of innovation. Really exciting to see them starting to deploy this right now. Code for America. This is an organization been around for a couple of years, really exciting organization. So they create brigades of volunteers across the country, these different sort of meetups in different cities. And their charge is to recruit volunteers to solve civic problems using technology. They're an open source by default sort of organization. So volunteers get together in their town. Let's say it's Raleigh, North Carolina. They get together and they say, okay, well, there's this problem with the community. One of them that a Code for America Brigade faced was if you had a court date, the courthouse would send you a postcard with your posted court date on it. But if you didn't have a permanent address, or if the mail was delayed, or the courthouse was a little late in getting the postcard out, which would happen from time to time, you might miss that court date and then have a bench warrant out. No one's fault. It was just sort of an old system. So what the volunteer group did was they found out that the court dates were all posted on the courthouse's website. They built a simple app that you could sign up with your cell phone number, and if you ever have a court date posted, you would get a text. They just built a simple app that would scrape the courthouse's website and look for your name and your phone number. So now you don't have to worry about getting that postcard, getting it late. You get a text the instant the website is updated. Totally open source project. They posted it to GitHub. They told a few other brigades about it. And now other Code for America brigades across the country are starting to use this piece of software. They downloaded it and they're setting it up for their own community. It's a really cool thing where you saw these volunteers, these techy sort of volunteers actively engaged in their community looking at civic solutions, created this great solution that benefited all of their fellows in their community, but then we're also able to share it more broadly, and it can be implemented nationwide. Any community that wants to use it, it's now this free piece of software that's being deployed everywhere. Really, really cool organization. Another one here is Tidepool. So the founder of Tidepool, his daughter was diagnosed with diabetes, and he found out that the different monitoring devices that she needs to use didn't communicate with each other, and to get the data off of the monitoring devices to give to their doctor or to give to researchers had to be done manually. They had to plug the device into a proprietary piece of software, and it was a very painful, very arduous process to get the data off of these different devices. So he went to these different manufacturers and worked to get them to communicate using the same open standards. So he created this platform for them called Tidepool that communicates with all sorts of different diabetes monitoring tools, where you can quickly upload your data from your devices just using your phone and share it immediately with your doctor as long as they're using the same platform. You don't need to make a special visit to offload data. You don't need to use any special kind of software. You just use this open source tool to do it. In addition, what's really exciting too is the way they support this organization, and it's a nonprofit, but the way they fund it is through research institutions. So research institutions can pay into this organization to then use that data, and it's anonymized, and it's all done according to HIPAA, to then further do research into diabetes. In the past, anyone who wanted to participate in a study and give their data to these institutions would have to physically go to the research institution, hand off that data, again using that device, plugging it directly into the computer. Now it's all done through this sort of open source cloud platform. Really, really exciting way to use open source and to work with private companies to get them to use open source, all sort of in the same boat. And so the last example I can give here is something called GiveSource. This just came out this year as well, and it's an open source platform for powering giving days. So it was created as a partnership between a company called FireSpring out of Nebraska, the Lincoln Community Foundation, and the Rakes School of Computer Science. And it cuts traditional fees taken by similar platforms drastically. So if you are an organization that has a day of giving or any kind of sort of concerted fundraising effort, you can spin up this open source platform, power it all. It's a very turnkey solution. And the fees that you would normally pay in terms of licensing, in terms of transaction fees, are vastly reduced than anything else in the market there. And because it's open source, you can customize it in any way needed. Again, those traditional platforms are pretty monolithic. You can't change them too much. This is, by virtue of open source, totally customizable, configurable to fit whatever is necessary for the campaign. So some examples of people doing open source in the broader ecosystem. Oops, and I see we have a question here. So we had a great question here. What are some ways you're seeing small organizations use open source? It's a really great question. So the biggest way we're seeing small organizations use open source is by tapping into the ecosystem in terms of using what's out there. Give some really great examples of how it's being shared, but ways you can use open source is the really, really interesting part. And I'm actually going to show you in the next few slides here some projects we've released that we think are going to be really useful for small organizations to tap into, where it's not an ask to share anything, but going to give you some demos of things we've created that we're really excited to share. So first off, we launched a campaign back in 2016 called Faces of Founders, and it was a user-generated content campaign whereby visitors to the site could upload their profile photo, apply kind of a cool filter to it, and post it to this photo wall, with the end goal of demonstrating what sort of this diverse entrepreneur ecosystem can look like. When we launched the campaign, we heard from a lot of folks that said, wow, this sort of photo upload tool, we could see that being used on a number of different campaigns. So we said, cool, we will open source it. We'll release that code. So if you look in the image here, the original campaign had this sort of green Face of the Founders brand to it, which sort of fit in the whole theme. So we took away the branding and just left the core tool of it, that photo upload, user-generated content, photo wall kind of application for anyone to use. It's posted to GitHub, and it's just it's a basic WordPress site. You can download it and launch a similar campaign in far less steps than it took for us to build it, because we're sharing this open source code. And we're going to send out that link to it too if you want to check it out. I have it at the bottom of the slide here, but that should be going out, so you can check that out in a little more depth. The platform is our analytics dashboard. So internally here at the Foundation, we have a team who is dedicated to ongoing testing and review and just data exploration of how our efforts are impacting overall via data. And the more data we shared internally with the organization, the more questions we got. So we decided to turn and create an analytics dashboard, something we could give to the staff that had a really nice, easily accessible view of things like Google Analytics, things like mail open rates, all those sort of marketing stats that show how we're tracking in terms of getting our message out there. Again, same situation. We talked to a few peers about it, and they said, wow, we could use the same thing. So we turned it into an open source project. Anybody can download this analytics dashboard and set it up to talk to your own Google Analytics account or your own MailChimp account and brand it to fit your organization's logo and colors and share it with your team, that you have a really, really easy way to access what's otherwise pretty confusing data if you use Google Analytics. It's a great tool, but sometimes hard to answer basic questions. This tool answers those questions for you, and we've released it free for, per that question, any kind of small organization to use very easily. And have another great question for about, I've never coded or used GitHub before, how do I learn the basics? So you don't need to necessarily know how to code to take advantage of some of these open source projects. If you go to GitHub, sort of a profile page, it's like a project demo page, and if you scroll down to the bottom of the page for any one of these projects, we have a description and oftentimes a button to try out the project, where if you click it, it launches a sort of a demo of it. You can kind of kick the tires and you can see if you like the project or not. If it's something you find useful or something you want to take advantage of, then you can bring in somebody who knows how to code a little bit. So if you have a vendor or if you have somebody who volunteers some coding help, you can give them this project and say, hey, can you set this up for me? Very easy to set up an open source project as compared to building something from scratch. So oftentimes for someone who knows a little bit of coding, it's an hour of their time to quick set up something like this, whereas many, many development hours went into the creation of this project, but because we're sharing it, cuts all that time down super, super small. And then the other platform to show you here is something called the Weekly Roundup that we built this year as well. So our marketing and communications team spends a lot of time media monitoring, tracking the news in our different movement areas around inclusive entrepreneurship and impact investing. And they would spend a couple hours every week collecting all those stories and formatting them to a nice email that gets shared amongst our staff and different stakeholders to just give a landscape overview of what's happening for the week. So we built in turn a platform where they just paste in the URL to the news stories they're tracking, and this goes out to those pages, grabs their headlines, grabs the dates, grabs the publication name, description, all those kind of basic metadata things, and formats it all into a really nice email. So what normally took hours for our marketing and communications team and a few interns to do now takes maybe a half hour for one person to punch in the URLs, quick arrange the email the way they want it and just hit send, and create these beautiful branded emails with all the clips and news stories that they need to know. And so we open source this as well. So anyone can take this, set it up with their color scheme for their organization, put their logo on it, and do their own sort of weekly roundup the way we do. Another great question. So this is a really great question. So how do the use of open source tools affect intellectual property ownership of the ultimate tool? So open source, when you open source something, you don't actually give up the ownership rights to it, or it's not like public domain where it's not anyone's IP anymore. If you open source something, you're still the owner of it. It's still your intellectual property. You're just licensing it for others to, you're giving it away under a free license. And so when you release an open source project, you will attach a free license to it. Just and there's a couple different in the community that are some standard ones where it just says, we are posting this code free for anyone to use. It's our property, but we're giving you a license free of charge to use this. And there's always a disclaimer in there too that says, by using this, we are not responsible for any harm you do with it, because you are giving away something for free that isolates you. But it's still your intellectual property rights. So you could always take the open source project down if you wanted to. There's nothing that says you have to keep it out there. And in addition, there are some open source licenses that say this software is free for you to use, free for you to do with it as you please. And if you make any contributions to it, or if you change it in any way, you need to also post your contributions to it also to GitHub. So you need to also share whatever you change. That's the really exciting thing about open source, is it's sort of spawning the continual share. And it says, hey, this is free. You can use it. If you like it and decide to change it in ways that are unique, please share those as well. And we see that happen often in the open source ecosystem, where people continually share their improvements and they iterate off of each other. So of those platforms I just showed you, and actually the Review-O-Matic was one that ended up not being in there. So of those three different projects, Faces of Founders, Analytics Dashboard, and Weekly Roundup, are there any that might be useful to you, or you might want to explore further after this call? Cool. Yeah, Analytics Dashboard, definitely the winner there. That has been by far the most talked about project we've had. And so another poll question here. So in terms of what open source can do for you, are any of these things you think open source can help improve for you? Access to technology, cost, or increased collaboration? Or do you not see the value yet in open source and would like to hear more? Cool. Yeah, that's great. So yeah, access and cost, definitely the two big winners by far. Yeah, that's great to hear. So let's talk about some ways to get started with open source, how you can get started sharing a little bit and taking advantage. First of all, when using open source project, when taking on a new project where you might have to employ some sort of technical solution, greenfield, you have not picked anything yet, but oftentimes there's an open source solution for a variety of problems that are technological in nature. So think about how a problem might already be solved by open source, and is this a problem that you see many people encountering? It could be an open source project. When picking a vendor to do a tech build, consider vendors that are open source friendly. Talk to them during the RFP process and during the proposal process. Say, hey, how often do you use open source? What kind of open source projects do you use? And work with a trusted team of partners, and like I said, tech vendors, to really explore the open source ecosystem and see what's out there. Another great question here. Could the Weekly Roundup be used to email external contacts, out media updates and staff and things like that? Yes. So the way that works in the Weekly Roundup is you punch in any emails. So it's not like a MailChimp where it's a specific list that you send things out to. It's just like a to field. Think of it almost as like just a normal email sent out of Outlook or Gmail, where you punch in the emails you want it to go to. And that was done that way because it's designed as an internal staff tool that you punch in, I think that our email goes out to 20 people, so we just paste in those 20 emails. But if you had a list of people who are internal and external, different stakeholders, you can absolutely do that. We wouldn't recommend doing this at like a scale level campaign where if you have many thousand people you're delivering to, you probably want to look at like a platform like MailChimp because they have better list control, so people can opt in and out. This is much more meant for people who are in sort of a small circle who are expecting these notifications, expecting these emails, and you don't need to do any kind of fine-grained list management like you would in a MailChimp or a Constant Contact. So diving back into using open source, again, just to restate, when you're picking a vendor or partners you're working with, make sure they're open source friendly. Talk to them about what kind of open source projects they use and what their attitudes around using open source projects are. So finding open source projects, this is one I get often. Big ecosystem of open source projects out there. So when you start to do that research, when you start to maybe identify some things that are open source that you're looking at, you want to make sure you're picking open source projects that are active. Sometimes open source projects get posted to places like GitHub, and they're active for a few years, but then maybe the developer moves on, maybe the organization that sponsors it went out of business, anything can happen where a project kind of becomes abandoned. So you want to make sure you're finding active projects. The way you detect that is when you're looking at the GitHub page for it, you'll see how often things are updated. There's for any file, any kind of thing related to the project, it'll say when it was last updated. So you want to see the updates that happened in the past few months. If you're seeing updates that only happened in the past few years, that's probably not that's a sign that it's probably not an active project. Also in GitHub, there's an issues tab when you visit the project. If you see a lot of issues, that's actually a good sign. So a high amount of tickets and issues and people logging problems doesn't necessarily mean it's bad software. It actually means it has a very vibrant and active community of people who are passionate and are logging issues and actively solving problems. So if you see a lot of issues, a lot of conversations happening, it's a really good sign for the open source projects. And then also projects that have a notable amount of sponsorships. If IBM, for instance, sponsors an open source project, that's a pretty good sign that it's a really active and useful open source project. And you often see, like I said in the beginning, a lot of corporations, a lot of companies sharing open source, and it'll be pretty strongly noted that this is an Apple open source project, this is a Google open source project, and that's a very good sign that it's a well-maintained, managed, and safe project. Another great question, what are the security and virus concerns with open source? So it's a little bit of a counterintuitive notion, but the idea is that with open source, because you are publishing all the code, all the inner workings of a piece of technology, that actually is going to make it more secure. It's sort of the security through transparency idea that the community responds so quickly to issues in open source that the minute there is a security concern, someone is on the job fixing it. Whereas a closed piece of software, companies can sometimes sit on security concerns because no one knows about it, sort of a quiet thing until one day it gets discovered. Whereas open source, we see the community respond so quickly. For instance, WordPress, active security updates happening all the time. Doesn't mean WordPress isn't secure. What it actually means is it has a vibrant community of volunteers, people working on it, identifying these security concerns and squashing them immediately. So open source, it often argued, is a more secure type of software than closed source. And then contributing to open source. This is sort of the flip side of the coin, that there's a lot of great open source projects out there to use, but also contributing back to open source is a really, really great thing to do in terms of giving back to this great community. So if you find an open source solution out there, but maybe needs some work to close the gap, consider sharing that closing the gap work you did. If it's a solution you find that's 90% of what you need, that 10% you add on might also be really valuable to other people in the community. So consider sharing that additional work. And if it's a totally new project, engage with your peers in your community to understand maybe this is a partnership opportunity. Maybe this is something where you pool your resources to sponsor the creation of a new open source project or the work of pushing an open source project even farther. Really leverage that power of the community. And then so in terms of creating totally new open source projects, the key here when you're considering, okay, we're trying to solve a problem with technology, we think we need to create it from scratch, we're going to see if we can open source it. The trick to that is taking a step back and saying, okay, does this problem, this piece of technology we're trying to build in an abstract way, does that help others solve their problems? And again, that's a task of engaging with your peers, engaging with nonprofits, tackling similar problems or attacking different problems but in similar ways, and saying, hey, we're thinking about building this thing. Could this be valuable to you if we open sourced it, and talk with them about what that could look like? And again, that can create a partnership opportunity that maybe you find that you have maybe slightly different missions, but you need to accomplish the same kind of immediate tactical tasks. And by collaborating on an open source project, you can solve those problems at half the cost for each other of what it initially would have taken. And that's all discovered through engagement with peers and really understanding what other people are tackling. This brings us to the end of my section of it, but we now enter into Q&A. So happy to take any questions anyone might have, or if you need me to go back and clarify something, also happy to go and dig a little deeper on any of the areas I talked about. So here's a question. If you are using a tool like WordPress and plug content in to build out a tool, you can't charge licensee fees for the use of the tool. So that gets a little more complicated in that way. The short answer is yes, that does sometimes happen because you are licensing access to information or some sort of tool that you built on top of the platform in an interesting way. If you're exploring something like that where you do need to charge licensing fees or charge for access because it's part of a larger model, that's something when you're coming up with a terms of use and a licensing agreement that comes with any kind of platform like that, an attorney can help you dissect the intricacies of that, where you're using open source but selling a product. Happens very, very often. Like I said, almost all consumer products that have software in them are using some form of open source software. So it just takes a little bit of crafting of a terms of use for a website to clarify what is being licensed and what is not being licensed, and that puts you in the clear. Other questions? No other questions at all? Cool. Okay. Well, here is my contact information, so you can find me on Twitter. Also, we sent out all the GitHub links, but here the reminder of our GitHub screen name is Case Foundation. My personal one is John Jones 4. And if you have any further follow-up questions, please feel free to shoot me a note at johnj@casefoundation.org. Usually try to respond pretty quickly, so feel free to reach out.
All right. Thank you so much, John.
Yeah.
I'm going to go ahead and LinkedIn and Twitter. And we also have a blog, blog.techsoup.org, where we post a lot of tips and tricks and things like that. And we have a few webinars coming up in November, so if you guys are interested in attending a future webinar, you can see the dates here, and then also the URL where we have all of our webinar information. Again, John, thank you so much for today's presentation, and thank you to Zareen on the back end, and to our sponsor, ReadyTalk, and then also to you guys for attending.